So here we are, and here you are. And first of all, I would like to thank all those of you who have come from far away for this event. It means a lot for us to receive you here in Stockholm, so thank you. And I would like to start with a question. Is there anybody who would agree with me that finding the IDGs was like coming home? Yeah, me too. And would anybody agree that is one of the most beautiful vehicles for individual development? But the magic of the IDGs is actually not what it can achieve on individual level. The real potential of IDGs is the impact it can have on organizational level and systemic level. But in order to reach that potential, we have to collaborate. Because all of us who are here, individuals and organizations, we are parts of ecosystems for inner development, whether we come from the multilateral organizations, from the government, from the research world, from the hubs and communities, from the corporate sector, from the academia. And my job is to facilitate the creation of what we call minimum viable ecosystems for inner development, so that those organizations and those stakeholders in various countries can build the work on their experience, their priorities, which may not be climate. It could be poverty, it could be hunger, it could be peace. It doesn't make the climate question less important, but the realities are different in different parts of the world, as we all know. And once these ecosystems start talking to each other, the different stakeholders, they can together further develop the network and develop the IDGs framework and toolkit and share that with other countries. So why is it important to have different stakeholders involved in this work? And I'm very, very happy to have this beautiful panel of people representing different stakeholders, starting with Laurel Patterson. You are the coordinator of the SDG work at the UNDP. And I know your organization is very, very interested in the IDGs. That is why you're here. But I would like to know, how can the United Nations, and in particular the UNDP, contribute? What is your contribution to these ecosystems for inner development?
Thank you, Asa. And thank you, everyone. It's great to be here today. And it was really a privilege to listen to all of the other speakers with you this morning from the audience. I want to put two ideas on the table and then share two insights and look forward to hearing from the others as well. First of all, the UN has a key leadership role to play and stewardship role in achieving the SDGs. And we've just come out of the General Assembly in September, and you will have seen the headlines just like the rest of us. Doesn't look good. Overall progress sits at somewhere around 15%, and I'll make it worse and then better to say that's 15% for the goals and the targets that we're able to measure. And at this point, we're able to measure using internationally recognized methods and standards only 140 of 169 targets. And that may sound grim, but on the other hand, there's a lot of progress that's behind that. Since the agenda was put in place, 2015, it has grown leaps and bounds in terms of our ability to measure, understand progress, understand directionality. And fundamentally, what I think is key for progress in the second half is making this shift from thinking about 17 goals, which was never the intention to have a list and tick them off, wouldn't work, because the subtitle of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda is transforming our world. Sometimes we forget that. That's the intention behind this agenda, to transform our world. And that level of ambition came through across all of the goals, but not in our ability to measure it consistently. So what we've been working on at UNDP and with several of others in the UN family is bringing methods together, integrating them, layering them over each other, working with governments. We've been working with 95 governments this year to identify the acupuncture points, those leverage points and multipliers that can unlock progress across multiple areas. We know the SDGs are universal, we know they're interlinked, but what would it take to act on those interlinkages? So what's been very important for us is to take a map, not of goals, of targets, and start to chart the connections and the synergies across them. As important as the synergies is the trade-offs. And an agenda like the SDGs is full of areas for which we need to be conscious of the way that progress in one area, economic growth, goal 8, could slow down or even reverse progress in other areas. So when we've looked at that with countries, 95 in the lead up to the summit, a couple of things came through very clearly. One, growth really matters to countries, particularly countries that are still recovering from COVID. And growth is not our enemy. What is our enemy is growth at all costs. And this is what we're seeing in the world today. That growth is powered by fossil fuels, it's powered by carbon, and it's inherently unequal. So we see and sense into that. What countries we were working with identified is the way that decent jobs, decent work for all, equal pay for work of equal value. So I won't get you into the world of SDG targets, but it's 8.5, and you can look that up. But what you see in there is there's an opportunity not only to advance economic growth, but to make progress in Goal 10, reducing inequalities, to make progress in women's representation, voice, and agency in Goal 5, to make progress in reducing poverty, Goal 1. So we're trying to be extremely precise in an imperfect world and say, what are the ways and how can we tell and how would we measure? How will we know that effective institutions are improving health and education outcomes? They have to. This is what institutions are there for, is for delivering public services to the people that they serve. How do we measure that? How do we start to create these clusters and identify acupuncture points? And this, to me, is something that's really important work for us to take forward. We're going to be talking more about it tomorrow in this session, the ways that we can open this up to others. Right now, everything that we've built is open source. It's open code. You can interact with all of it today, and we can ask further into using data and evidence, but also sense-making into our experiences and the solutions, the good practices that countries have to move it forward. Now, the second thing that's very important for the UN system to bring in is ourselves. And so one of the things that we had to think very deeply about in integrating in the way that I've talked to you, data, evidence, experts, systems, you've heard it before, is ourselves. And this is where it's been such a tremendous connection with the inner development goals. We started on this journey during COVID, when all of us were at home, staring at screens, getting headaches, and saying, how did we get here? And how will we move from here, if not through ourselves? We developed a leadership journey, a global dialogue series. We invited anybody in the UN system to come. And we translated that into an action learning lab for anyone in the UN system, anywhere in the world, to come and be part of these experiences. We were overwhelmed by the response. We had sent this out by email. We didn't try very hard to brand or so, and we had 800 colleagues around the world. So it really spoke to the resonance of this, and of course we see it in the room, all of you here today. We've then taken that a level further, translated that into a leadership journey for all of UNDP senior leadership on awareness-based systems change. Because unless it's embedded in us, unless it's embedded in our institutions, it's very difficult to take this forward at the scale and the speed that is required. I wanted to leave you with two reflections from our work so far. The first is that I think it's really important to think about possibility, something we've been talking about today and will continue tomorrow, as something that we piece together. There's different elements of this, there's different contours and features which different people in this room all contribute in different ways. So what's been extremely important for us is putting the focus on collective leadership that creates and holds spaces. And that's an action word. That's an extremely important function of leadership. And it's a different one from some of the way that we normally think about leaders, this notion of holding space. So we've created a field guide, which you can find as well too. We try to make these tools and approaches that we're talking about today easy to understand for anybody that's leading work in these spaces, so that it doesn't become about the tools themselves, it becomes about the problems and challenges that we're working to solve together. The second and last point that I wanted to make was how important it is to move from an idea of fixing what's broken to reimagining the systems in which we are living, and we're all interacting with those systems every day in different ways. And for here, what's important is not only this sense of collectiveness, but understanding that people in many parts of the world work and think in systems. They don't call it the same way that we do in rooms like this, but there has to be a way, and this is really the fundamental project for us moving into the second half of the 2030 agenda, to build infrastructures of connection. And that for us means building shared intelligence, a shared understanding of the barriers, and we don't expect any of this to be easy. And I think it's come up in different sessions already this morning, but I want to emphasize it again. There's none of what we're up against is changed easily. These are entrenched systems, and the power that's held in those systems is not easily shifted. It's not easily. So I think it's incredibly important, the spaces we have the next couple of days, certainly taking the IDGs forward, is to build a resilience and a sense of connection within our spaces and push it. We call our work the SDG push. Sometimes I wish we called it the SDG shove, but we don't. We'll stick with push for now. But I really think it's important that we have that collective sense that it won't be easy. Not everyone will open the door. Many will be locked. Pursue it anyway. You know, this is our challenge, and this is where I think these spaces can be so powerful for us as a collective going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, for those very encouraging words and that big shout. And you are referring a lot to what's happening tomorrow, and then you're referring to track number 2 on global collaboration, where we will take those of you who have signed up for that track to a journey, from through 4 or 5 continents, from the hubs and networks, through the private sector, the government. We will go a bit more deeply into what we're talking about here today, and we will do that, facilitate that journey with some music and arts as well. So, and we will go much more deeply into this strategy that we have for integration of inner development into organizations and ecosystems, and that's what we call the IDG institutionalization strategy. And Yuri, you are going to be there tomorrow as well. You work at the OECD, and you are head of division for early childhood and schools there. And you, among many other things, you are running a very interesting project with the PISA framework. And you are going to share with us tomorrow more deeply about how the IDGs can be integrated into the PISA framework. Just imagine if all the school systems, all the educational policies in the world were benchmarking against PISA, and that was the IDGs. So please share a little glimpse on what you're going to talk about tomorrow, Yuri.
Thanks, Asa, and hello, everybody. So pleased to be here. And as Asa mentioned, I am from the organization called OECD, which is an international organization working for better policies for better lives. So my instrument to contribute to and influence the transformation of the society is the policy making, and particularly in the field of education, where I have been working for a long time. And the purpose of all this exercise to improve education policies is to make sure that young people and even older people have an opportunity to learn and get education which is meaningful and better education. And what we are doing is to answer to this question is in 2 areas. One is when we talk about meaningful education, what it means. Everybody can have different ideas, different expectations. That's why it's important to have a common language. And here in the IDG community, you have a very strong foundation, which is the IDG Framework. That gives you the common language to talk about what are the issues that you want to talk about and what are the goals that you want to achieve. So that's a foundation. In education field, we need that too. That's why OECD worked with many countries to shape that. But what we did was first to create a space where we can listen to different people. First, students, who should be at the heart of the education debate, but very often they are actually overlooked, unfortunately. So we brought students at the center of the debate, but also asked questions to teachers, policymakers, researchers who could also bring the insights from a research field relevant for the learning of young people, and discussed what futures young people want. Instead of adults imposing the vision of the future, we asked learners what future they want to build, and discussed what kind of competencies, skills, education systems need to support, and what kind of skills young people would like to develop for themselves to be the agent of the change, to be the citizens of the future. Then what we did was to shape the framework to cover holistic dimensions of learning, which is now called the learning compass. So it resonates the concept of the compass that you have in IDG. And this compass of the learning provides ideas and common languages of the future of learning, so that education systems, and especially those who create curriculum, who teach curriculum, have the shared understanding of where we want to go in education. But second instrument or tools for the inference is, as Asa mentioned, international benchmarking. I don't know how many people have heard about PISA. Maybe in Sweden it's quite popular, yes. PISA is, as you know, the test of competencies of 15 years old students. And it's not a test for every student to get where they stand. It's more the information that policies makers can get. That's why education ministers get excited or nervous when it comes closer to the release of the new PISA data. Why we do this? Because if we want to improve something, we need to know where we stand. We need the roadmap, and we need a good information where you are and how you want to move ahead. That's what international benchmarking in education can do. And that is also part of the SDG indicators. For example, SDG 4 education, PISA provides some information where we stand. However, PISA has been focusing on some traditional, I would say, areas like mathematics literacy, scientific literacy. But what you might not know well is that PISA is actually trying to capture how students are learning in the areas where IDG Framework pointed out. For example, PISA tests the skills of collaboration of young people. Or now we are trying to compare across education systems the creativity of young people, or the sense of agency. For example, when studied the scientific literacy of young people, it was very interesting to see the gap between what they learn and what they know. Many students across the world know what the sustainable development is about, what are the issues of the climate change. But when we ask to the same students, do you feel you are capable of doing something? Or do you actually do something, take actions to address the issues? Much less students say yes, which means that there's a gap between knowledge, brains, and hands and feet to take actions. So this is the kind of things that we need to even highlight in the future when we talk about the benchmarking and measuring the success, so that we have the good compass, or nowadays GPS, to guide us to reach the goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Yes, in Sweden we are painfully aware of the PISA system because we were not doing so well. But maybe now, from your work, I think our grupparbete will come in fashion again. You speak about policies, both of you. And Gabriel, you have been for a long time working with policy. in the Swedish government as a minister, and now you are coordinating the SDG work for the Swedish government, different ministries. What is the contribution that the government can have in these ecosystems for inner development, from your perspective?
Well, you know, I come to realize that the most important thing that the government and the political system and officials like myself can contribute is, and it might sound like a very low ambition, but it is to speak the truth. Because you know, we have been doing in Sweden, and I think in most other countries for a very, very long time, painting this very bright picture where we have not acknowledged the problems that we are facing, and we have overestimated our ability to manage those problems or meeting those challenges. And I remember when we were heading out of the pandemic a couple of years ago. And, you know, during the pandemic, I don't think I was the only one who were referring to or quoting Winston Churchill saying that don't let a good crisis go to waste. I think we were quite many that believed that this could really be the moment where we started to change our systems. Because we, in a way, even though it was a very black period in recent times, it was also a time where we realized that we could really do things in a different way. But the first message from the Swedish government, and I think from many other governments when we were heading out of the pandemic, was that we hope that people start to consume again. So we will, you know, make the economic wheels turning, and we will get back on a growth path again. And this is, of course, totally wrong. Because in the same time, each and every year from the pandemic until now, we have had this report saying that the situation is even worse than we had imagined. And people are reading these reports. Young people are reading these reports. And at the same time, the core message from the system is that we can do business as usual. And I don't find another term for it, but this is schizophrenic. And it's no wonder that people turn away from politics, that they turn away from the solutions that could really help us, that they turn away from each other's. So the first and most important thing for us is to speak the truth and acknowledge these reports and say that if we are continuing this path, there is no hope. We can't believe in green growth. We can't believe in eternal economic growth because it is physically impossible. And it is really when we first acknowledge this that we can do something about it. Because everything that the IDG stands for, I think that they are based on one thing, and that is truth. Without truth, you can't have any trust, you can't have any real interconnection, you can't have anything else that we are aiming for. So the truth is really the core foundation, and I'm sorry to say, but this is the biggest challenge that we are facing now, to telling the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel. It's not every day you hear that from a politician.
A former politician.
But we are all stakeholders in these ecosystems. It's not only about the multilaterals and the government. Where is the academia? You are all part of the ecosystem, and you, and you, and you, and do we have somebody from the academia here? Matt? Why don't you introduce yourself, and why don't you tell us what the academia, what is your role in these ecosystems?
Great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Matthew Lee, professor of the social sciences and humanities at Baylor University and also director of the Flourishing Network at Harvard University. And I'm really glad to be speaking about the development of ecosystems for inner development for broader flourishing. And one of the challenges that we face is that we have often, as Dan was saying earlier, we've understood flourishing to be our own kind of subjective, individualistic well-being, and that's not what flourishing is. Flourishing is really about regenerating the capacities that enable all people and all living things to thrive over time, so that it's a net positive with each engagement. And so when we think about how do we do this, well, there are, fortunately, and this is why I'm glad to be affiliated with academia as a sector in conversation with other sectors, we can find groups doing this already all over the world, and we can use the methods of science to surface what they're doing. And so there's been a lot of concern about living in a post-truth world and a replication crisis within science, but within science, there's a movement towards open science to try to address that. So we have the creativity already, we have the capacity, and there are people around the world already living in a way that promotes inner growth for the attainment of these sustainable development goals in a way that we would truly call flourishing. And what are they doing? They've created, in the words of one of our friends at the Institute for Strategic Clarity, an ecosystem of sacred hospitality. So they have become convinced that there's only Mui, and that we have to make sacrifices as we move, and some of our other friends at the Presencing Institute say, moving from ecosystem to true ecosystem. And so I think it helps to have a North Star to kind of know where we're going. And there's deep wisdom in the humanities disciplines, there's rigorous methods in the sciences. We can bring these together, and people are doing this within the academic sector. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Now, do we have anybody from private sector here?
Thanks, Åsa, for throwing me under the bus. Talk about the dark side. Yeah, so we run a private equity fund that invests in education in developing Asia and developing Africa. The private sector is not as big in expanse, in money or reach as the government, but it is one of the players in this platform that we need to build for humanity through the IDGs. And the more legs this has, academia, government, the UN, please, make it a stamp, individuals, civil society, and the private sector. So on the ground, what we find is we do have the narrative of the lie of Wall Street, which is, maximizing shareholder value. And that leads to just one metric, and that's money. Unfortunately, we've taken this as a human race in our globalization from, countries to religions to countries to globalization platform with economics, and governments too measure just GDP and mostly. So we need to change that narrative, private sector, to maximizing or optimizing stakeholder value, and value does not mean money, it means a lot of other things. So what we're doing on the ground, what we've done in India, there's an India Hub Center, is we've done a couple of things that I just want to share and then pass it on. There's so much to be said here. One is we've tried to see where we were, assess it. We tried to make a link between the IDGs to the SDGs, which was a little more subjective, more qualitative. But we managed to make a quant assessment, and early in March, we put it on an open large language model. And I think you've experimented with a few hundred people on that. So to see where we are, to take a stock of where you are, or an organization or individual is on on the IDGs. And this is not something that the IDG Home Office has approved, but it was an experiment. And the second thing we've done is we've gone into organizations, our own portfolio companies, and our own networks, and tried to link the IDGs with the actual outcomes that people have already. So if it's critical thinking that we have here, we talk about, IQ testing, or if values and values match, trust and trust, we have those training models. But we try to link everything, culture building, perspective taking, we went into some cultural thing and used some of those tools. So we tried to link everything on the IDGs to something that they're doing internally. And of course, COVID has helped us, look at, well-being and mental health and all of those things. And we've also done a naughty thing by saying we can also link it directly to all the metrics you want, lower operating costs, higher returns, pricing things. We've done that. It's an interim step. It's not something I recommend, so handle with caution. It is a machine gun, but it's one way of getting people onboarded quicker. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jetu Lalvani. Stop here. Thank you, Jetu, for sharing that. And I mean, that's one of the magic things about the IDGs as well, that people bring new things to the table the whole time. It's all about co-creation. And we will not be here today if it wasn't for the hubs and networks. So thank you, hubs and networks, for making us come all this way. And Pontus, you have this beautiful title, Hubs and Networks Coordinator. What 400 hubs, what kind of a job do you have actually? Can you tell us?
Yeah, I ask myself that question too. and I feel really humble because for me, this is very much of serving what wants to emerge by itself. It is happening. And I'm asking myself every day, in every meeting, how can I support this? How can I help connect people and dots and get out of the way of what wants to emerge? And I've actually changed my title yesterday. You don't know that, Åsa, but it says co-coordinator. So next to me here is also Ariel Goodman. And also, an applause for Ariel, where she is. Next to me is also the global coordination team and resource team of hubs and networks. And a big applause for them as well. And all the coordinators of more than 400 hubs that have been emerging during 18 months. So it's incredible. It's really explosive, this growth. And I'm super excited to see where this is going to end. Maybe we should pause and just watch a little video with a greeting from the hubs.
Yeah, and then we'll just sum up together.
And then I can say a little bit more about what we do.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Herzliche Grüße aus Berlin.
Hola, Kaisho.
Konnichiwa.
Hey. Olá, sejam bem-vindos.
Vi är IDG Göteborg.
Hallo allesammans!
สวัสดีค่ะ Hola, bom dia.
Hello from Scotland.
Добре дошли.
Hola.
Bonjour, grüezi.
Hej fra IDG Oslo Brave Hub. Hello, hola.
Hello, IDG community.
Hola, Kaisho.
Moin Moin und Ahoi. My name is Mario Hauf with the IDG Mental Health Hub Hanover.
Hello, a big hug. My name is Karine Bied and we have formed here in Zurich, Switzerland.
Herzlich willkommen aus Köln, Cologne.
Moin. Welcome to the IDG Learning Hub innergoals.vi.
Moyen, Sophie Le Donner Debout from the Hub Luxembourg Level Up.
Merhaba, I'm Asa Jarskog from IDG Turkey Prosimo Economy Hub.
Guten Tag,
I'm Alexander Evet, coordinator of the IDG's Vienna Community Hub.
Hallo, Servus, grüß euch, dear IDG community. We send a warm virtual hug to the global IDG family from all of us here at the IDG Vienna Leadership Development Hub.
Hallo en welkom vanuit Amsterdam.
Ciao a tutti da Amsterdam.
Liebe Grüße aus Amsterdam.
And we are the IDG Hub Amsterdam.
Ciao, buongiorno. Hi everyone, I am Miriam Ines and I represent an Italian hub, the Rome and Milan Bottega Filosofica IDG Hub.
Habari Zareo, IDG Tanzania.
So hi there, IDG Globals. This is IDG The Hague of Rotterdam.
Hola a todas y todos, muy bienvenidos desde el Hub de los IDG de Santiago de Chile. Les damos la más cordial bienvenida.
To bring the IDGs to life,
we connect local communities.
And we combine people from all corners.
And we share best practices.
Yeah, and this is of course just a small fraction of everything that, you know, all the people who are out there. And I also want to say that, you know, realize that this is an open source framework and anyone who feels called can start a conversation, start a hub. We say that you need to be 3 people to be a group, so that's what's needed. A lot of organizations are also joining. Existing movements are joining this movement of movements, and I think that is amazing. Hubs are contributing with advocacy, spreading the message. We are building capacity by working and training on the skills, by finding and exploring and developing and innovating tools. We're supporting the academic outreach and helping out with a one-question survey, and you know, loads of other things. Of course, activism in the local plane, in the networks connecting across the globe also. So it's quite fascinating, and I think the main strategy that I have seen. You know, how do you do it? How do you support this? And for me, it is about creating spaces and helping others to create more spaces for conversations, for connection, and for, you know, becoming smarter together. Because connecting the dots, you may think it's an individual task, like when you were a kid and were doing those drawings in a drawing book, connecting the dots. But these kind of dots that we're talking about, we can only do it together.
Thank you, Pontus. Now, having listened to these other stakeholders, what is your thought, Laurel? What's come to your mind?
Well, I tell you what, I mean, what I wanted to share back with the group is what I heard from all of you. And I want to share it as a provocation for us to think about these next few days. Also invited our colleague, asked the question, who's here from private sector? What happened in the room? Ooh, we asked. And there was even an apology as our colleague stood up. And yet, if we are going to advance an energy transition, say we would agree we need to advance an energy transition. In the poorest countries in the world, it will cost $2.3 trillion annually. Annually. If we want to invest in social protection floors so that more women can enter the formal labor force, so that more children can go to school, there's a cost implication of these things. We need all players at the table. Those are in private sector, those are in banking, those are in government, those are around the table today. So I really want to encourage us, as that's an area that perhaps we have some bias we may not have recognized until we sort of may have heard it in the room here a little bit. Let's tackle it, because these are the things that hold us back. And these are precisely the spaces we want to be able to explore so we can break through. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Any final comment from you, Pontus? How can the hubs and networks, because I understand there are many different stakeholders represented in the hubs and networks, but the majority, you would say, because of movement, it would be what we call civil society. How can civil society reach out and support what other stakeholders are doing?
Well, I think that in this global movement, we are really cross all sectors. And I think that is the big potential here, that we hold all the pieces together. And that I think is the whole thing here, that if we can connect and have these conversations and also see that it is possible, we are part of the solution and we're part of the problem. And I feel, if I would say a last word here, I feel so deeply touched by Rosanna, who was reading the poem earlier. And for me, the message from her is that we have to expand our hearts to be able to hold both the pain and the possibility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. That was a beautiful ending note, I think. And we will continue this discussion tomorrow in the track number 2 on how on earth can we work together. Thank you.